Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Ashok IT. Today, we are going to understand what is Spring Boot, why Spring Boot, advantages with the Spring Boot. Okay. If possible, we will try to create our first project also by using Spring Boot. So today is day 1 for Spring Boot and microservices. This is our first session for Spring Boot and microservices. As part of today's session, mainly we are going to learn 3 topics. What is a Spring Boot? Why we need to go for Spring Boot? What are the benefits we are going to get with the Spring Boot? Spring Boot application creation. How to create our first application by using Spring Boot. All right. Now here, already we learned Java, core Java, advanced Java, and Spring framework, some basics also available. Now, nowadays in the market, Spring Boot is having lot of demand. What is this Spring Boot? The definition, Spring Boot is an approach to develop Spring applications with less configurations. Okay. By using Java, you can develop a standalone application. You can develop a web application. Later point of time, frameworks came into picture like Hibernate framework available, Struts framework available. Later point of time, Spring framework came into picture. By using Spring framework, we can develop all the layers of the application. Spring is called as application development framework. Spring framework released in the year of 2004. The first production version came into market in the year of 2004. In 2014, the Spring people released Spring Boot into market. So Spring Boot is also used to develop Java applications only. Spring Boot is a Java framework which is used to develop Java applications. But here Spring is already there, then why this Spring Boot came into market? Spring Boot is an approach to develop Spring based applications, Spring framework based applications with less configurations. Spring Boot is an extension for Spring Boot is an extension for existing Spring framework. Spring Boot is not replacement for the Spring framework, guys. Spring Boot is an extension for the Spring framework. That means whatever the features are there in the Spring, what are the concepts available in the Spring, what are the modules available in the Spring, all those things we can use in the Spring Boot also. And Spring Boot supports rapid application development. Spring Boot supports rapid application development. What is the meaning of rapid application development? We can develop any type of application quickly by using this Spring Boot. So can you please tell me what is the Spring Boot now? Spring Boot is an approach to develop Spring framework based applications with less configurations. Spring Boot is an extension for Spring framework. That means Spring Boot internally uses Spring only. Spring Boot internally uses Spring framework only. Spring Boot supports rapid application development. When we say what is a Spring Boot, Spring Boot is equal to existing Spring framework, existing Spring framework plus auto configuration minus XML configuration. Okay. So whatever the concepts are available in the Spring, those concepts will be available in the Spring Boot, and additional Spring Boot is providing auto configuration and it is avoiding XML configuration. When we go for the Spring framework, we will do the configurations by using XML files. But when it comes to the Spring Boot, that XML configurations will not be available. Everything is based on annotations only. Everything is based on annotations only. So this is the definition for the Spring. Boot is an approach to develop Spring based applications with less configurations. Boot is an extension for existing Spring framework. Boot is internally using Spring framework only, and Boot is supporting for rapid application development. Spring Boot means Spring plus auto configuration minus XML configuration will be available. Now, by using Spring Boot, we can develop several types of applications. By using this Spring Boot, we can develop several types of applications. By using Spring Boot, we can develop several types of applications. By using Boot, we can develop a standalone application, which is a console-based application. So we can develop a standalone application by using Spring Boot, and we can develop web application also by using Spring Boot, which supports for customer to business communication. And by using Spring Boot, we can develop distributed applications, which are nothing but B2B communications. In the other terminology, we will call them as web services or REST APIs. So currently in the market, Spring Boot is mainly used for these REST APIs development only. So basically in the market, projects are getting developed by using microservices. Microservices nothing but a collection of REST APIs only. To develop collection of REST APIs, we are going to use Spring Boot. Boot is used to develop microservices based application. Boot is used to develop microservices based application. Every microservice is one REST API. Every microservice is one REST API. All good. So this is the definition of what is Spring Boot. If anyone asks you the question, what is the Spring Boot? You need to tell that Boot is an approach to develop Spring-based applications with less configurations. Boot is extension for existing Spring framework. Boot is internally using Spring framework only. It is not a separate framework, guys. Internally, it is communicating with the Spring framework only. And this Boot is supporting for rapid application development. Quickly, we can develop any type of application by using Spring Boot. Boot is equal to existing Spring framework. Whatever the functionalities are there in the Spring framework, whatever the modules are there in the Spring, all those modules are there in the Boot also. Along with that, it is providing some auto configuration and it is avoiding XML configuration. What type of projects we can build by using Spring Boot, guys? What type of applications we can create using Spring Boot? We can create using Boot. So what type of projects it is supporting? Can you answer? By using Spring Boot, we can develop several types of applications. What are those several types of applications? Using Spring Boot, we can develop standalone applications which runs only in one system. Using Spring Boot, we can develop web application like Gmail, Facebook. Multiple users can access that application at a time. By using Spring Boot, we can build distributed applications also. What is the meaning of distributed application? REST APIs we can develop. Web services, backend APIs can be developed by using Spring Boot. What is the architecture people are following to develop projects in the market? Microservices. Front-end project will be separate. Backend project will be separate. In the backend, multiple APIs will be available. To develop these APIs, we are going to use Spring Boot. Next one. Sir, why this much craze is there for the Spring Boot in the market? What are the advantages with the Spring Boot? So let's discuss Spring Boot advantages. Let's discuss about Spring Boot advantages. So first let me note down what are the advantages available. Then we will discuss one by one. The first advantage with the Spring Boot, which is form starters. What is the first advantage with the Spring Boot? Form starters is the first advantage. Second advantage is version conflict solution. Dependency version conflicts. Dependency version conflicts. Then third advantage, embedded servers. Third advantage, embedded servers. Fourth advantage, auto configuration. Fifth advantage, actuators. Like this. There are multiple advantages with the Spring Boot. Can you read what are the advantages with the Spring Boot? First one is form starters. Second one, dependency version conflicts. Third one, embedded servers. Fourth one, auto configuration. Fifth one, actuators. Now, first of all, what is form starter? Form starter means when we are developing any application, we need to add several dependencies in the form.xml. Okay, so Spring Core dependency, Spring Context dependency, Spring MVC dependency, JSON dependency, like that. Lot of dependencies we need to add in the form.xml. To resolve that problem, to simplify our Maven and Gradle configuration, to simplify Maven and Gradle configuration, Spring Boot provided a concept called form starters. So here, if you add one Spring Boot starter, it will download all the required dependencies. You no need to add so many dependencies in the project form.xml. If you add one dependency, then Boot can download all the required dependencies for that, which is called form starter. There are several form starters available in the Spring Boot. For example, if you want to develop a web application, then Boot is provided Spring Boot Starter Web dependency. Spring Boot Starter Web is available. If you add this web starter, it will provide everything which is required to develop a web application by using Spring Boot. You no need to add 10-15 dependencies in the form.xml. So form starter, if you add one form starter, it will provide everything for your web application development by using Spring Boot. So basically, form starters are going to simplify our project Maven configuration. Then next one, similar to this, there is a one more starter available, Spring Boot Starter Data JPA. There is a starter available which is called Data JPA. If you want to communicate with the database, you add the JPA starter. It will provide everything to work with the database communication, loading the driver, getting the connections, creating the connection pool. All these things will be taken care by Data JPA. Similarly, there is a starter called Spring Boot Starter Mail. If you want to send an email by using Boot application, then you can add Mail Starter. If you want to secure your application, then you can go for a dependency called Security. Spring Boot Starter Security dependency will be available. Like this, there are so many starters available in the Spring Boot. What is Form Starter? So in the interview, they will ask, what is form starter in the Spring Boot? What is the purpose of form starters, guys? Form starters will simplify project Maven or Gradle configurations. Form starters are used to simplify Maven or Gradle configurations. So we have several form starters in the Spring Boot like below. We have several form starters. We have several form starters. What are the form starters available? One is web starter. Another one is JPA starter. Third one is mail starter. And fourth one is security starter. Like that, hundreds of starters available in the Spring Boot. What is your requirement? What you want to do in your project? Based on that, you select one starter in the Spring Boot. Now, I want to develop web application with security. Then I will add web starter plus security starter. Web starter will provide the support for web application development. Security starter will provide the security for our application. I want to communicate with the database. Add the JPA starter. It will provide the things required for database connection. So here you no need to write so much configuration in the pom.xml or in the Gradle when we are developing boot application. The reason, boot will provide form starters for you. So can you tell me what is a form starter? POM starters are used to simplify Maven or Gradle configurations. Can you tell me some POM starters you know in the Spring Boot? Come on, web starter, JPA starter, mail starter, and security starter. And the next one, when we are adding dependencies, when we add POM starter in project, when we add POM starter, boot will take care of version. Boot will take care of dependency version. In general, when I'm adding the dependencies, for example, I'm adding Spring Core 2.5 version or Spring Core 6.3.1 version. But data JP Spring JDBC, I have added one more version 6.3.2. Maybe Spring Core version is not compatible with Spring JDBC different version. So when you are working with normal Spring applications, you need to add your dependencies in the pom.xml like this. You see here, you need to add context, JDBC, MySQL. Which version MySQL driver required? We need to add the version number. For example, if this MySQL driver 8.3 not compatible with JDBC 6.13, then project cannot run. One dependency version should be compatible with the another dependency version. If you go for normal Spring framework, it is the programmer responsibility to identify which version dependencies we want to add. But when you go for Spring Boot, you no need to specify the version number. Boot will identify which MySQL driver is compatible with the Spring JDBC. That will identify the latest dependency version and it is going to download that version. When you go for normal Spring framework, there is a chance of getting dependency version conflicts. One dependency version may not be compatible with the another dependency version. Programmers has to do lot of research and they need to add the dependencies along with the version number. So the dependency version conflicts are very common. Okay, because project will not be developed by using only one technology. My project will use Spring. My project will use Kafka. My project will use Redis. My project will use Redis server, Kafka server, security, JUnit, JSON, Jackson, JAXB. Lot of libraries are required to develop the application. Which version of library is required for the project? Which version is compatible with our project? That programmer should verify. So to avoid that problem, Spring Boot POM starter will take care of dependency versions also. You no need to write the version number manually. Spring Boot will take care of that version number. Dependency version conflicts issue can be solved by using Spring Boot. Good. So when you add the POM starter, it will take care of the version number which is required for that dependency. Next one. The second advantage with the Spring Boot is embedded servers. What is the second advantage, guys? It is embedded servers. Server is basically used to run our web application. So if you develop a servlet application, to run the servlet application, we need a server like a Tomcat server or a JBoss server. Some servers are required. Servers are only required for our project or it is universal requirement? Universal. If I develop servlet application or if anyone develop, that application should be deployed into one server. So that is a common logic. Every programmer should download the server, install the server, deploy the project in the server. That's why Spring Boot provided a concept called embedded server. Boot application, Spring Boot will provide servers to run our application, That means we no need to download the Tomcat. We no need to install the Tomcat to run boot web application. Here, whenever you add web starter in the project, Spring Boot will provide a server to run your project. Okay, so the Spring Boot projects will be deployed in the embedded servers. So Spring Boot will provide servers to run our application. If application started, server will start. If application stopped, server will be stopped. The server is associated with the application only. You no need to do any extra setup to run your web application. You just run your project, server will start, deployment will happen. You just stop your application, server will be stopped. So that means the server is associated with our application. That's why that is called as a embedded server. Spring Boot is providing multiple embedded servers, guys. One is called Tomcat, which is default. When you add the web starter, by default, Spring Boot will provide you Tomcat server. So second one is, it is providing Jetty. Third one is Netty. So like this, in the Spring Boot, there are three embedded servers are available. One is called Tomcat. Second one is called Jetty. Third one is called Netty. What is the benefit with this embedded server? What is the benefit with the embedded servers? Programmers no need to set up the server separately to run the web application. You just run your web application, server will be started for your application. If you stop your application, server will be stopped. What are the embedded servers available in the Spring Boot? What are the embedded servers available? Tomcat server, Jetty server, Netty server is available. Can we see this practically? Yeah. Now, just go to your IDE. Just go to your IDE. Then create one project, guys. File, new project. Okay. There is an option called Spring Starter project option is available. There is option called Spring Starter project available. In your IDE, click on next. Select the name of the project. Let me give this one as 09 Spring Boot App 1. I'm creating my boot application. When you are creating boot application, selecting Maven or Gradle is mandatory. You need to create the boot application by using a build tool. You can use either Maven as a build tool or you can use Gradle also as a build tool. I'm selecting Maven as a build tool. Okay, simply click on next. Here, what is the latest version of the Spring Boot? Come on, what is the latest version of the Spring Boot? 3.2.2. And remember, every 2 weeks, the new version is coming in the Spring Boot. Okay, so already 3.2.3, 3.3, 3.3 are ready to come for the production. Currently, they are under snapshot. They are under development. Maybe next week, the 3.3 version also comes into market. Currently, what is the stable version of the Spring Boot? 3.2.2. Now here, these are called as dependencies. What dependency you want for your project? I want to develop a project by using web starter. So what is the dependency available? Spring web dependency available. So when I'm going to select Spring web dependency, can you read this? What they are saying? The tooltip is available. Can you read the tooltip? Build web RESTful applications using Spring MVC, uses Apache Tomcat as a default embedded container. So that means if you want to develop a web application by using Spring Boot, you just add the web starter. You just add the web starter. Then you can develop web applications, RESTful applications using Spring MVC. What is the meaning of that? Boot is internally using Spring Framework and it is providing Tomcat as a default embedded container. So you no need to set up any server for your application. Boot will provide the server for you. You just select this, click on next, click on finish. So I created one boot application. In that application, I selected one starter that is called web starter, POM starter. Now go to pom.xml file. When I go to pom.xml, boot parent is available 3.2.2. Then scroll down, web starter is available. Am I writing any dependency for web starter? Any version for the dependency? No. I selected web starter. Along with that, what is coming? Test also is coming. Boot to starter test is available to unit test your application. To write the JUnits for your application, test starter will be available. Boot to 3.x version requires minimum Java 17 version. Boot 3.x requires minimum Java 17 version. So I selected web starter. By default, test starter is also coming. Web starter to develop web application and REST APIs using Spring MVC. It is providing Tomcat as a embedded container. Providing Tomcat as a embedded container. All right. Let me go and run this application now. So let me right click on this project, boot application, run as boot application. That's it. I'm trying to start my Spring Boot application. Application started. Is it success or failed? Failed. What is the reason? 8080. So in my system, Oracle database is already available, which is using 8080. So here it is trying to start the Tomcat server with 8080. What is this one? It is trying to start the boot is trying to start the Tomcat server with the port number 8080. Database is already running with 8080. Tomcat also trying to run with the 8080. Two applications cannot use the same port number in the single machine. So in my system, already database using 8080, Tomcat also trying to use 8080. Two applications cannot run on the same port number. Now, I will tell to Spring Boot, hey, change the Tomcat server port number to 9090. Instead of 8080, change it to 90. You don't understand what is this file and all. Forget about that. Just we want to see what is the power of the Spring Boot. How to create the project, where to write the code, what properties will be available, what configuration required, that we will discuss in the coming classes. Today, our target, what is the Spring Boot? What are the benefits with the Spring Boot? What are the real advantages we are getting with the Spring Boot? I created boot application by using web starter. Okay. Now, let me run this application, run as boot application. Go to the console, see that one. Can you read this? What it is saying? Tomcat server started with the port number 9090. Application started and it is deployed in the Tomcat server. But if you go for servlet applications, if you develop a project by using servlet, you need to write the application code, you need to create a servlet, and you need to deploy the project in the Tomcat server. You need to download the Tomcat, you need to install the Tomcat. Now, I want to develop one web application which will give you a message. Okay. So this is my Spring Boot application class. Forget about the code. Forget about the code. Now, I will make few changes in this code. I will show you what is rapid application development. I want to develop one web application which will give you a welcome message. Okay. Now, let me write one method here. Public string get message, just return welcome to Ashok IT. That's it. I'm writing simple one method and I'm mapping to URL pattern. My web application is ready. My web application is ready. You just start the application, you access the application. How many lines of code I am writing to develop a web application? Just one method I am using, one annotation I am using. Is there any XML configuration available? Nothing. Just start this project, run as boot application. My project is ready and it is deployed in the server also. What is the proof? Go to the browser, localhost colon 9090. What is the port number? 9090. Am I able to access my application? How much time it is taking to set up a web application in the Spring Boot? Fraction of seconds. Fraction of seconds. We just created a project by adding web starter and I created one method and I started my application. My application deployed in the server also. Now my application is running in the Tomcat server. I'm able to access my application. Same thing if you want to do in the servlet, 5 to 10 minutes of time is required. In the Spring Boot, within 1 minute, we are able to do that. That is called rapid application development. You can develop any type of application very easily by using Spring Boot because it is providing some auto configurations. Whatever the configuration is required for our application will be taken care by Spring Boot you can focus on your business logic. Now you understand what is POM starter? What is POM starter? This is going to simplify our project configurations. Maven configurations will be simplified. Gradle configurations will be simplified by using POM starter. Whenever we are adding the starters in the pom.xml, do we need to write any version for the dependency? Boot will take care of the version for the dependency. Boot will take care of the version for the dependencies. What is the third advantage? Embedded server. What is the meaning of embedded server? What is the meaning of embedded server? Embedded server will run your application, will deploy your web application in the embedded servers. What are the embedded servers available in the Spring Boot? Tomcat, Jetty, Netty. When you will get the embedded server, if you add web starter, it will give you embedded server. What is the default embedded server? Tomcat. If you want, you can change it to Jetty or Netty also. Some configuration is required in the properties file. Now, what is the default port number of the Tomcat embedded server? 8080. But in my system, database is running with 8080. Am I able to change the port number to 9090? Yes. By using, there is a properties file available. Server.port is equal to 9090. Now Spring Boot is starting Tomcat server with the port number 9090. Are you clear? What is rapid application development? What is rapid application development? Quickly we can develop our applications. So by using Spring Boot, we can achieve that rapid application development. Tell me, what is the Spring Boot? Come on, what is Spring Boot? I want everyone to respond. Spring Boot is an approach to develop Spring-based applications with less configuration. Boot is a replacement for the Spring or extension for the Spring? Boot is extension for the Spring. In 2004, Spring came into market. In 2014, after 10 years, Spring Boot came into market. Already Spring very famous in the market for application development. So in the Spring, configurations should be taken care by programmer. Whereas in the Spring Boot, auto configuration is available. To simplify the developer's life, to support rapid application development, to reduce configurations in the application development, Spring people provided Spring Boot. Spring Boot is an extension for the Spring. Boot is internally using Spring framework. Boot is used to develop Spring-based applications only with the less configurations. Are you able to follow me? Can you repeat once again? What is the Spring Boot? Spring Boot is an approach to develop Spring-based applications with less configuration. It is extension for the Spring framework. It is internally using Spring framework. It is supporting rapid application development. What type of projects we can develop by using Spring Boot? We can develop a standalone application, web application, and distributed applications also. Distributed applications are nothing but REST APIs. What are the advantages with the Spring Boot? Form starters, dependency version conflict solution, and embedded servers, auto configuration, actuators. What is the form starters? They are going to simplify our project Maven or Gradle configuration. Whenever we are adding the POM starters, do we need to write the dependency version or not required? Not required. Can you tell me some POM starters which you know in the Spring Boot? Web starter, JPA starter, mail starter, security starter is available. Okay, good. Next one. What is the embedded server? What is embedded server? Embedded servers are used to run Spring Boot applications. Basically, web application and distributed application requires a server. That server will be provided by Spring Boot. The server which is providing by the Spring Boot is called as a embedded server. What are the embedded servers available? In the Spring Boot, we are having three types of servers: Tomcat, Jetty, Netty. Tomcat is the default embedded server. Can we change from Tomcat to other servers also? Yes, some minor changes required in the properties file. Then in the XML file, form.xml, then we can change from Tomcat to Jetty and Netty also. Next one, the main important feature in the Spring Boot, which is called auto configuration. So let's understand what is this auto configuration. Auto configuration, it is one of the most important feature in the Spring Boot. It is one of the most important feature in Spring Boot. Because of this auto configuration only, Boot became very popular in the market. So why Spring Boot is very popular in the market? Because of auto configuration. Auto configuration means Boot will identify configuration required for the application. Boot will identify configuration required for the application based on form starters, and it will provide that configuration in runtime. Boot will identify configuration required for the application based on form starters, and it will provide that configuration in the runtime. Now, for every Spring application, IOC container is required. So whenever you run the boot application, IOC container will start automatically. Whenever you add the web starter, server will start automatically. When you add the JPA starter, database connection pool will be created automatically. When you add the security starter, security will be applicable for your application by default. So that is called auto configuration. Now, am I writing any logic to start the server in this project? Am I writing any logic to start the IOC container in this project? Now everything is taken care by boot only. Let us see. Let me run this application once again. Run as boot application. See the console. Now can you read this one? Application is starting by using Java 17. Tomcat server started. Why Tomcat is started? Because there is a web starter. Because there is a web starter available. Now, boot will think like a intelligent. Programmer added web starter in the form.xml. That means programmer going to develop a web application. For web application, server is required. Let me start the server. So that is the maturity Spring Boot is having. If you don't add the web starter, Tomcat will not be started. If you add the web starter, then only Tomcat will start. That is called auto configuration. Based on your form starters, based on the starters available in the form.xml, boot will identify configuration required for the application, and it is providing that configuration in runtime of the application. Can I prove auto configuration with one more example? Now, so currently my application is started. Am I able to access my message now? 9090. I'm hitting the URL. 9090 is my port number. I'm able to access my message. Now, let me make one change in the form.xml. Go to form.xml. I will add one dependency called Spring Boot Starter Security. What is that, guys? Spring Boot Starter Security dependency I am adding. Do I need to write a version number or not required? Can you read that message which is giving? Duplicating managed version for boss. Already boot will manage your version. You don't duplicate that. You don't need to write it once again. Whenever you write a dependency, boot will take care of the version. You no need to write that version. So simply remove that version. Boot will take care of the version. Earlier, when this dependency not available, I was able to access my message directly. Okay. Now I'm just adding one dependency called starter security dependency. That's it. Let us go and run our application now. Refresh our application. Run as boot application. I'm running this project. I'm running this project. Okay. Go to browser. Hit this URL. What happened? When I hit the earlier, when the security starter is not available, I was able to access my message. Now, am I able to access this message? Not able to access the message. It is asking to log in. This is called authentication. Security is added for our application. Now, if you enter some dummy username and password, it is saying bad credentials. You need to log in order to access my application. Did I develop this login page? Who provided this login page? SpringBoot. How? Why it provided the earlier that page was not there, now that page is available. What I have done as a programmer, I just added one dependency. If I add the security starter login functionality coming for our application, how to access this? Username will be default will be user, password. It is printing on the console using generated password. It generated a password. It printing that password on the console. Take that password and give that password, sign in. Now I'm able to access my application. Can I say this is one auto configuration? Can I say this is one auto configuration? Yes, this is a auto configuration. Tell me, what is the definition for auto configuration? Based on the form starters, boot will identify configuration required for the application and it will provide that configuration. We have seen two examples here. What are those two examples? One is the embedded server. Embedded server comes under auto configuration only. Security also comes under auto configuration only. Similarly, if you configure database information with JPA starter, then connection will be created with the database. So database communication will happen with the boot application by using that JPA starter. Are you able to understand? If anyone asks you, what is auto configuration in the Spring Boot? What is auto configuration in the Spring Boot? It is one of the most important feature in the Spring Boot. What that feature is providing to our application? Boot will identify configurations required for the application based on the form starters and it will provide that configuration in runtime. I have added two starters, two form starters. One is a web starter, second one is security starter. What is happening with web starter? Web application development plus a Tomcat server is also coming. What is happening with the security starter? Authentication is coming to our application. Similarly, if I add JPA starter, database connection can happen. Are you able to follow this? Right. What is form starter? What is form starter? Form starters are used to simplify Maven or Gradle config. Now, understand. When these many benefits are available in the Spring Boot, who will not use this Spring Boot in the company? Can you tell me any company which will not use the Spring Boot? Are they paying any money for the Spring Boot? It is free. Spring Boot is free. Spring Boot is open source. Anybody can use the Spring Boot to develop the Java application. So that's why every Java project is getting developed based on the Spring Boot only. The reason? Rapid application development, auto configuration is available. No configurations you need to take care. IOC container, it is starting. Tomcat container, it is starting. Security, it is providing. Connection pool, they will provide. You just write your logic. You just focus on your business logic. All the common logics which are required for the project will be given by Spring Boot. So when you compare Spring and Spring Boot, Spring is a framework. Boot is also a framework. But what is the difference between Spring and Spring Boot? Auto configuration. In the interview, they will ask you this question also. What is the difference between Spring and Spring Boot? Spring is a framework. Boot is extension for the Spring. In the framework, some manual configurations are required. In the boot, auto configuration is available. When you go for the boot, this embedded server concept is not available. Okay. This default security configurations are not available. In the Spring, programmer should take care of the configurations. But in the boot, auto configuration is available. Are you able to follow me? So what are the advantages of the boot? Form starters, embedded servers, auto configuration. Form starter will simplify Maven or Gradle configurations and embedded server means boot will provide a server to run our web application. Boot is supporting for three types of servers, Tomcat, Jetty, Netty. By default, it is Tomcat. When you add web starter, Tomcat is coming by default. What is the port number? 8080. Can we change the port number? Yes. Where we are changing? Properties file. Server.port 9090. Tomcat running on 9090. And I have added security starter. Application is secured with the login page. So that is also auto configuration. Auto configuration means boot will identify configuration required for the project and it will provide that configuration in the runtime. Now the question, how boot will know what configuration required for the project? Uh, if I add security starter, then only security coming. If I add web starter, then only Tomcat server is coming. So auto configuration will be provided based on the form starters available in the application. And one more thing, when you are using Spring Boot, you no need to install the database also. Embedded database is also available. How we are getting the embedded server? Similarly, Spring Boot will give you embedded database also. Can we see the embedded database now? Yes. To work with the embedded database, some configurations are required. First one is data JPA. Spring Boot starter data JPA dependency we need to add. Okay, version number. Do I need to write it or not required? Not required. What is the purpose of data JPA? It will try to connect with the database. Okay, now I have not added any information related to database. Just I am adding data JPA. Okay, stop the application. Now application will fail, guys. See the reason? Run as boot application. Now I'm just starting my application. It is failed. What it is expecting? I have added JPA. What is the meaning of JPA? It is for time pass or to communicate with the database? To communicate with the database. When I add the JPA starter, boot is checking, boss, with which database I need to connect. It is checking for the URL. Boss, where is your database? I want to connect to your database. I want to get the connection from the database. So here, boot is eager loading. When I add the JPA starter, it is checking for the database to connect. But in my application, database information available or not available? Not available. Can we add the database information? Yes. So let me add the database information. I will add the database information related to H2 database, guys. What is the database I will use? H2 database. H2 database is called in-memory database. So here I have given one H2 database example. Let me find out that. Data JPA is available. H2 database somewhere I have added. Which number? Number 12. No, it is mapping. There is the application with the H2DB separately. Yeah, let me come back. I need to do some configuration for that. It will be available. Yeah, H2DB application is available. In the pom.xml, I need to add one dependency for H2. Let me go to this dependency. Let me add this. Along with the JPA starter, I'm adding one dependency which is called H2 dependency, and I need to configure H2 database information. Let me configure H2 database information in the properties file. It will be available. Copy this. Okay. In future, we are going to learn what is all this configuration. Today, just I want to show you demo. What is the auto configuration? What are the benefits of using Spring Boot? So what I have done now, I added two dependencies, guys. One is JPA dependency. Another one is H2 dependency. Here database URL, username, password, driver class I have configured. That's it. Let's run our application, refresh, clear the console, run as boot application. Run the Spring Boot application. Now, can you see this one? What it is saying here? Bootstrapping data JPA repositories, IOC container, web application context is created. Then initialized JPA repository. What is this one? connection pool is also created. Connection pool is also created. Now let's go to our application. Then localhost colon 9090 slash h2 hyphen console. Localhost colon 9090 slash h2 hyphen console. It is asking my username, which is user. Where is the password? Password is available on the console. Let me take this password, give the password, sign in. Okay. So h2 hyphen console home is available. 1 minute. Let me remove this security. We need to do security updations, guys. So security updations we will do in the coming classes. I'm commenting my security starter. I don't want security for this now. Refresh our application. Run as boot application. Go to another browser, Edge browser. Yeah. Localhost colon 9090. Localhost colon 9090. I'm able to access my REST API. Is it started? 8080 is there. Properties file 9090. Refresh. Maven. Update the project. Force update. Yeah. Server port number 9090. Run as boot application. See the console. Now application started. Now security is not available. Tomcat is running with 9090. Now refresh this URL. Are we able to access our application? Yes. Along with this, go here, h2 hyphen console. h2 hyphen console. The database console is not loading. Why? Check it here. It should print a message that we can load h2 console. Started the application, second level cache, Hibernate is loaded. Enable h2 console. h2 console enabled is equal to true. Spring dot h2 dot console dot enabled is true. Refresh. Maven update. Force update. Yeah. Run as boot application. h2 console is available. Let's try. Yes, now. So with this, can you see here? I'm able to access my h2 database. SA, click on connect. Now I connected to my database. Now you can write your SQL queries in the database. Am I installing any database, or a database is coming along with my application? Database is coming along with my application. Okay. Now select sysdate from dual. Select sysdate. You can create a table also. Create a table emp underscore id, which is number or integer. Then emp name is available, which is varchar, and emp salary, which is also a number. So like this, you can create a table. Table is created. Employee table is created. Now select star from EMP. So EMP table is available currently. No data is available. You can insert the records. You can update the records in the table. So this is external database, or this is embedded database. Embedded database. Embedded server is available. Embedded database available. When my application is running, database will run. If my application is stopped, database will be stopped. This embedded database, not for the real time, guys. This is for practice purpose. In your system, database software is not available. Quickly, you want to learn some topic, you want to develop one application. Instead of downloading the database, installing the database, you can set up embedded database in your application. This is for practice purpose. But in the real project development, external database will be available. Embedded database is only for practice. The reason, if I stop my application, database will not be available. If your application is running, then only database will be available. Embedded database and embedded servers are available. Okay. How I added embedded database for my application? I made two changes, guys. One is I have added JPA starter in my project and H2 database I have added. In the properties file, I configured my data source properties with which database my application should connect. Tomorrow, I want to connect with the Oracle database. Then what I will do? Just I will change the URL, username, password, driver class. Then my boot application can connect with Oracle database. I want to connect with MySQL database. I will change to MySQL properties. Then boot application can connect with the MySQL database also. So this is auto configuration. Am I loading the driver? Am I creating the connections? Everything will be taken care by JPA starter. If you add the JPA starter, loading the driver, getting the connection pooling, everything will be taken care by JPA starter. So we have seen three starters now. One is web starter. Second one is security starter. Third one is JPA starter. What is the purpose of web starter? To develop a web application with a embedded server. What is a security starter? What is security starter? It is used to secure our application. What is a JPA starter? To communicate with the database. Similarly, we are having mail starter and security starter is available, mail starter available, actuator starter is available, microservice related dependencies are available, lot of POM starters available in the Spring Boot to provide auto configuration required for the application. Whatever the starter you add in the pom.xml, based on that, boot will identify what configuration is required and it will provide that configuration in the runtime of the application. Are you guys clear with this? Yes. Next one, there is another benefit with the Spring Boot, which is called actuators. Can you spell it out? What is that? Actuators. Actuators are used to monitor and manage our application. What is the purpose of actuators? When we are running our application or when we deliver our application to the client, we need to monitor that application and we need to manage that application. To monitor and manage the application, Spring Boot provided a concept called actuators concept. Damn sure question in the interview. Can you explain actuators in the Spring Boot? Actuators are used to monitor and manage our application. Today, it is just an introduction. What is actuator? So in the coming classes, we are going to learn about actuators for 1 hour. Okay. So every topic that we are discussing, you see in the previous batch, I explained about actuators. If you type actuators Ashok IT, so there is a video. So what 1 year back, I uploaded that video related to what is the actuators in the Spring Boot. It is a live class only. In this live class, I explain how we are going to configure actuators in the Spring Boot. Okay. So today intention not to know everything about the actuator. Today you just need to remember what is the actuator. How to work with that. That is part of our syllabus. Now you see, so there is 50 minutes of discussion is there only on the actuators topic. So by using actuators, can you read this one? What is this? Beans. What beans will do? Whenever you run your application, so many classes will be loaded to your application. Those classes are called as bean classes. How many beans loaded by IOC container we can get by using beans actuator? Similarly, can you read what is this one? Mappings. What it will do? What all the URL patterns available in the application, we can get it. What is the health? What is the health of your application? Is your application running successfully or not? Are there any memory issues in the application? Can be identified by using health actuator. config properties. What are the properties loaded by our application? What are the metrics of the application? What are the loggers of the application? Okay, all these things we can access by using actuator. Now you see, like this, we are going to access actuator in our application. So these are the URLs to know information about your application. These are the URLs available to monitor and manage our application. Who is providing these URLs for us? Actuator is providing. Actuator is one benefit in the Spring Boot, one of the advantage in the Spring Boot, which is used to monitor and manage our application. What is the health of our application? How many beans loaded by our application? Okay. What is the configuration properties loaded by application? What is the heap information? How many threads are running in our application? How many URL patterns available in your application? All this information we can get by using actuators. So that is one of the Spring Boot feature. Form starters, auto configuration, embedded servers, and actuators available. These are the major advantages of using Spring Boot. And Spring Boot main advantage is rapid application development and auto configuration. By using Spring Boot, we can develop applications quickly, and Boot will provide configuration required for our applications. Are you guys clear? So you got the clarity? What is Spring Boot? Why Spring Boot? What are the advantages with the Spring Boot? What is form starter? What is auto configuration? What is embedded server? And what is actuate? Theoretically, we understood. So practicals we are going to do from tomorrow. So tomorrow we are going to develop first application by using Spring Boot. What is the Spring Boot application folder structure? How to create the first application? How to run that application? What is happening internally when we run the Spring Boot application? We are going to discuss in the tomorrow session. From tomorrow, don't miss the classes because actual Spring Boot is started from today. Today is the first class on the Spring Boot. Tomorrow we will see Spring Boot application development and we will understand internals of the Spring Boot. Are you guys clear? Yes. Tell me what we learned today. Can we revise quickly? Yep. Today what we learned? Today we discussed about what is Spring Boot. Can you tell me what is Spring Boot? Approach to develop Spring-based applications. Why Spring Boot? Less configurations are available. What are the advantages with the Spring Boot? Form starters, embedded servers, auto configuration, and actuators. What type of applications we can develop? Standalone applications, web applications, and distributed applications also we can develop by using Spring Boot. What we are going to learn tomorrow? How to create the first application by using Spring Boot, how to execute that, internally what is happening in the Spring Boot, we'll discuss in the tomorrow session. Okay. Any questions for today? Offline people, any doubts that you have? No. At the time of creating the project, we can add them. Yes, you can. I added web starter directly, right? Similarly, you can add the remaining starters also. Some starters you can add directly from there. Any other dependencies, third-party dependencies, manually you need to add. Required dependencies, yes. Security, JPA, I added manually, right? Not required. But at the time of project creation only, we can select what are the dependencies required for our project. Based on those dependencies, auto configuration will be provided. Yep. Next question. Anyone from offline? No questions? Very good. Thank you guys. From tomorrow, come to project class at 7:30 a.m. and 9:30 a.m. Boot class will be available. So don't miss 2 classes from tomorrow onwards. Thank you. You can leave.